The House of the Dragons is proving the narrative of the Rings of Power wrong. Let me explain. But first, a word from our sponsor. This video is sponsored by Mountaineer brand. All natural products for everything that you will ever need, from deodorants to beard oils to shaving products to skincare and more. Discount code, as you can see. Don't forget to try them. Absolutely fantastic. Great company. I use their stuff daily. Their products have been a godsend. Like I said, discount and all the info you need below. The huge success of the House of the Dragon has proven Amazon and the shills and everyone and the mainstream critics and all of these people and Whoopi Goldberg that deserves a slap in the mouth wrong. And let me explain why. The whole situation is that anyone criticises the Rings of Power, and 99.9% of the criticism of Rings of Power is nothing to do with race or gender, it's nothing to do with identity politics, it is to do with the structure. Be it the writing, be it the bastardization of Tolkien's work, be it the fact that this show is badly paced and poorly written to the point that it's almost insufferable, with wooden and cheap and cheesy dialogue that feels stunted and unnatural. But if you say that, you are labelled something. You are labelled an ist of some kind. Be it a misogynist or the ist with the hard R that will get me banned on YouTube. This series is bad. And like I said, it is just a bad series, but you know what's interesting? Look at the House of the Dragon. Great writing, great characters. Why I do disagree with some race swapping of established white characters, or race swapping in general, either way I disagree with, by the way. I just want to clarify that one. It goes both ways and I disagree with it wholeheartedly. They've proven they can write a good show. Yes, there is an agenda there. Yes, it does pop its ugly head up every now and then, but it's not the driving force of the series. And labelling fans and critics of this show phobes of some kind is not how you're going to do it. And they really started, looking back at the build-up to this, they started way back when, before we even knew what the cast were, this defensive thing. Amazon just wanted to cash in on the success of Game of Thrones. They wanted their own Game of Thrones. They didn't want the high epic fantasy of Lord of the Rings. They wanted a socio-political fantasy like Game of Thrones, and the structure of these episodes that we've seen of Rings of Power so far is very reminiscent of early seasons of Games of Thrones. And I find that weird and disjointed in so many ways. They're trying to shoehorn a socio-political fantasy into a high fantasy setting, and it's not working, especially when those narratives were never there to start with. But labelling fans, critics, anyone who disagrees with what you've done with this show a ist or a phobe in any way is not a good way to get people on your side. To label Tolkien himself a ist or a phobe is not any way to get anyone on your side, and all of those claims can be proven wrong simply by reading his letters, reading his work, and looking at the strong women of the Rings of Lord of the Rings. Galadriel is one of the most important female characters in fantasy. It's very simple. And her story is intertwined with the history of Middle-earth, where, if you believe the critics, that's not there at all. I've also seen people try and defend the Rings of Power as canon to the books, or even the Peter Jackson movies, but the events, the timelines, the characterizations, the backstories, and everything else doesn't line up with anything presented in either canon. So they can't be canon if you've taken out characters who are extremely important. They didn't want to do this, and deflecting this criticism over and over and over again is ridiculous. They're now censoring fans. They are silencing people who are genuine critics of this show. It's hilarious that they didn't realise who they were dealing with, but also hilarious they had absolutely no clue on how to deal with anyone. At the end of the day, you can't present a canon series and remove characters and just put an original one in its place that are not related, even species related to the characters presented in the books. It's hilarious. And this endless deflection that you see from people online. I mean, we saw it with Wheel of Time, actually. They moved the story around. That should have been the first red flag for how they would handle the Rings of Power. And in fairness, The Wheel of Time is not a book series I liked, and I'm still not a fan of the series, and I know that's a controversial opinion. I've just never been able to grasp it. I find it very generic. But I was expecting something at least watchable from the television show, but seeing fans and people I know who love those books absolutely heartbroken at the series really did show me everything I needed to see. They don't want the actual story, they just want the name to sell it. And they're presenting these works in a way that is not true to the works originally intended or the original message of the works. These stories don't belong to you, Amazon. That's something else that people also need to learn. I saw it with the paid shills before, and as much as I am not a huge fan of Daniel Green, his relationship with Amazon was kind of iffy, and going by the leaks of Amazon and the emails they're sending influencers, it's very telling that they only want good press. Daniel Green was probably not allowed to say anything bad, really, about the series, but he got his paycheck. He got a free flight to London and stayed in a 5-star hotel and got to meet all the celebrities and walk the red carpet. I don't blame anyone for selling their soul if the payment is good, because we do live in a time when we need to... money is becoming an issue for even people who are reasonably wealthy. A series like this should have been the standard for fantasy, but it isn't. And deflecting that criticism and labelling anyone who criticises the costumes, the special effects, the story, the writing, labelling anyone that is criticising any small amount of this series as a phobe of some kind is disingenuous, nasty, and you really do take the power out of the word with the hard R and not using it for people who really are. Now, I am sure there's like that 1.0000 whatever minuscule percentage of morons who are ists and phobes who are rallying. But they're not speaking for Tolkien fans, they're speaking for morons. I could have forgiven some race-bent cast if they had just had the writing. I could have forgiven the casting in every way possible if they had just had the writing and the characters. You've got a $1 billion TV show that looks like it was made with less budget than the Game of Thrones, the first season. And that's a real shame to see. Where is this money going? The costumes, the armour? No. The special effects? No. The actors? I mean, basically, none of these people are well known. They're all minor players. If you look up their credits, they're not particularly big actors, and the only person that even I recognised in this series, if all honesty, was Lenny Henry, who is terrible in this, but I always thought of him as a comedian. I knew he was an actor, but I always thought of him as just the comedy guy who was married to Dawn French. He's the only person I've heard of in this entire series. So where has this money gone? Why is this show so bad, and why are they trying to make it a cultural phenomenon? Look at the ratings in the US next to the House of the Dragon, and you'll see what I mean. No one is engaging with this show, and at the end of the day, this show will end up like Star Trek Discovery. They'll keep going, milking it, but if you look at the actual viewing figures of Star Trek Discovery, they're just making content for a streaming service, and that's all this is. And it's a real shame. Amazon deflecting criticism, attacking people, attacking critics, attacking the fans, the actors doing the same thing, when really this show was a disaster from the ground up. From the first moments of that first episode that I sat down and watched, they didn't make a good series, they made content for a streaming service, and that's really sad. But yes, deflection of criticism and deflection of anything to do with the show is extremely bad taste, and censoring fans is also bad taste. And I will say this, review bombing is bad both ways of the circle. But it's funny how positive reviews from one account with one review of this series that seems very copy and pasted, or people just screaming how visually pretty it is, that are basically copy and pasted, isn't review bombing. Or people saying, well, I'm only watching it to get back at the ists, isn't review bombing. But negativity is. Amazon are deflecting, the cast are deflecting, And this show is a disaster. This show should never have happened to start with.